Welcome to the Africa iShare YouTube channel. We welcome the discussion and share any comments that you may have. If you're a tax practitioner within Africa, please consider joining the Africa iShare Tax Network. It helps us come up with panelists for future discussions and to keep the conversations ongoing after our discussions are done here. Welcome to the discussion for this week. Thank you.
The controversy has surrounded the question of whether taxing the informal sector should be, in fact, a major priority for developing country governments. To discuss this topic, we have three panelists. In the context of our discussion today, we narrowed down our discussion to refer to the informal economy as micro, small, and medium enterprise businesses and registered taxpayers. We have three important guests from Zimbabwe, from Egypt, and from Kenya to discuss this very critical topic on this platform today. I will briefly turn over to them. Our guests will start from our panelists from Egypt to briefly introduce himself, and then we'll go on to our panelists from Zimbabwe and Kenya. Just briefly tell us about yourself, and then we'll quickly delve into the subject matter. So our panelists from Egypt, please jumpstart this conversation.
Thank you, Darlington. My name is Mustafa Saleh Arram. I'm a senior tax advisor at Habitation Overseas Company. I have almost 10 years experience in field of taxation in Egypt. As a tax practitioner, my tax field of work including and not limited to corporate income tax, VAT, transfer pricing, withholding tax, and salary tax as well. I'm a member of Chartered Institute of Taxation in the United Kingdom and a member of Egyptian Society of Taxation in Egypt. I'm finally a member of Egyptian Society for Public Finance and Taxes in Egypt. Thank you, Christine and Darlington, for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Prince, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, good evening. Yes, my name is Prince Makoni from Harare, Zimbabwe. I'm a tax advisor based at Tax Minds Advisory in Harare. My main area of focus is corporate taxation, obviously taking into account income taxes, value tax, withholding tax, and international taxation of Zimbabwean companies. Our client base basically is a mixed bag. We've got some listed firms and medium clients as well. My background in taxation started in revenue administration with the Revenue Authority Zimbabwe. We have been working there, and part of my work included, it was a whole range of areas, including customs enforcement, tax compliance, tax audit, VAT, as well as producing physical papers as recommendations to the government. I've got research interests mainly in informal sector as well as the extractive industry. I'm very interested because I've also noted that even those big corporates in mining, which are formalized, to a larger extent, they are evading tax. In so much that I've also labeled them informal operators in part of my research. Thank you.
Thank you, Prince. We'll come back to Clay for your topic. Mustafa, can you begin this conversation? Tell us a bit about how is it like the informal sector? What's the definition of the informal sector in Egypt? Tell us what are some of the in terms of the challenges of the informal sector vis-a-vis taxation, and what are those basic things the government of Egypt is doing to handle the challenges, and I also want you to talk about the opportunities of the informal sector in Egypt.
Well, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises have usually been realized as a dynamic force for sustained economic growth and as well as very important for job creation and developing countries. And from a social point of view, SMEs secure livelihood for a large and ever-expanding segment of the population. And when it comes to Egypt, there are around 2.5 million SMEs, which representing almost 75% of total employed workforce, and nearly 99% of non-agricultural private sector established. Despite their importance, they are still facing several problems, in particular access to finance, which is a particular challenge in developing countries. In fact, 70% of non-OECD countries report SMEs financing gap compared to 30% only in OECD ones. Therefore, reducing this SMEs financing gap in low-income countries should increase the incentive of SMEs creation and consequently improve economic growth and increase job creation. In addition, improving the access to finance SMEs is significantly important in promoting entrepreneurship and innovation. For the informal economy, defined as all economic activities carried out by individuals or institutions outside state's control. And the income generated by the informal economy is usually not recorded for taxation purposes, and it's often unavailable for inclusion in gross domestic product. We find that workers at this sector are not subject to any social security system. So both of country and worker lose their rights totally in the informal economy. In Egypt also, the rate of informal economy activity reached 35% of GDP. This according to the World Bank study. This percentage is indeed extremely large. And to realize that, it should be noted that the same report stated by the World Bank has a weighted average size of informal economy in the OECD countries was only 13.5%, which is a big difference. And the informal economy was stated in that report also as 18.4% of the GDP in the European Union and only 8.6% in the United States of America. So I believe the main reason of expansion of informal economy in Egypt are due to the bureaucracy, which has become a negative feature of all governmental institutions in Egypt. Administrative corruption, I think we have administrative corruption as in 2014, Egypt occupied the 94th ranking position out of 175 countries, is according to the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. However, in 2015, Egypt's ranking improved to 88th position, where much of improvement was made in this area. I think that the complexity of tax system as well, one of the main reasons that leads to the expansion of the informal economy in Egypt, as the tax system in Egypt suffers from complexity somehow, and including its laws, regulation, and the process of collecting taxes as well. We found also that the poor economic growth rates, one of the main reasons of expansion of the informal economy, and the political unrest circumstances and change in labor markets as well. So, as part of the Egyptian government effort to encourage the Egyptian economy, in July 2020, the government issued law number 152 for the year 2020, and this law specialized or addressed to the development of medium, small, and micro enterprises. This new law aims to attract informal sector of economy and bring them under its umbrella, with a view to promoting employment in the formal sector and in this way, ensuring full enjoyment of economic and social rights by all workers. Moreover, it aims to legalize SMEs status under the Egyptian laws. This law defined medium, small, and micro enterprise as micro project. It's every single project which has an annual business volume less than 1 million annually, and for the small project, it's every single project that has an annual business volume of 1 million and less than 50 million, or every newly established industrial project with build-up capital between 50,000 ECT and less than 5 million Egyptian pound. And the medium-sized project is every single project with an annual business volume of 50 million Egyptian pound and not exceeding 200 million Egyptian pound. Moreover, the law defines the informal sector as every micro or small or medium project that carries out its activities without obtaining a building or operating license or any other license or approval that is necessary for practice activity. And this new law is encouraging SMEs project in several ways, whether by providing tax or customs or any other tax incentives. In addition, these incentives are available for several fields and industries, including projects that serve agriculture, animal production, information, projects that introduce new innovations into industry, digital transformation, for example, and industrial intelligence projects, and industrial projects as well, and renewable energy projects. For the incentives, the tax incentives under the new Egyptian tax law, or the new MSE law, according to the law, the project and informal economy project that apply to reconcile their status in accordance with the provision of this law, they are exempted from the stamp tax and exempted from having a documentation and application fee for a period of 5 years from the date of its registration in the commercial register. Also, the project shall be exempted from the tax and fees regarding to the land registration contract necessary for establishment of their project, as well as the law established a simplified basis for the permanent tax treatment of these projects. This simplified tax system actually divide SMEs into two main categories. The first one is micro enterprises, and the second one is small and medium enterprises. For the micro enterprises, we find that we categorizing either just a micro project or the micro projects from the informal economy during the issuance of the law into three main categories. The first one, a tax with an amount 1,000 Egyptian pound for the project whose annual business volume is less than 250,000 Egyptian pound. The second category of micro projects is have to pay the taxes with an amount 2,500 Egyptian pound on an annual basis, regardless regardless of the profited gains, or the project that have an annual base of volume of transaction between 250,000 and less than 500,000 Egyptian pound. And for the project has volume of annual transaction between 500 Egyptian pound and less than 1 million, they have to pay a tax amount of 5,000 Egyptian pound. This way will make it much easier for the micro enterprises not to apply the complex tax system and have to submit corporate tax return and have tax treatments and stuff like that. So becomes easier for
All right, Mustafa. We'll definitely come back to some of the nuances you are talking about, where the intervention of legislation, the Egyptian legislation, how you deal with the informal sector is concerned. But we want to bring Prince into the conversation. Prince, even though you are from the private sector, but tell us, what is it like the informal sector in Zimbabwe, in terms of the challenges? First, let's understand, how do you define informal sector, the informal economy? What are the challenges the informal sector is posing in Zimbabwe, and how is the government tackling the issue of informality? What are those things that the government is doing, legislation the government is putting into place, to ensure that they gradually bring people from informality to formality? Can you just briefly tell us some of the challenges? First, tell us about the definition of the informal sector in Zimbabwe, and then take us through what are those challenges and what are those things that the government is doing to mitigate some of the challenges.
Yes, thank you. The informal sector in Zimbabwe has been rated to be over 60% of the national GDP. And is according to the IMF report, is the second largest in the world. Most of the business activities in Zimbabwe are either unregulated, they are either not registered for tax, and the number is growing by the day. And the genesis or the origin of this informality started in the 2000s. At the turn of the millennium, Zimbabwe experienced economic challenges, which led us to have hyperinflation between 2000 and 2009, so much that when you go to work, it was not reasonable to go to work and get a salary that was losing value every second. So as a result, we saw a number of banks folding. We saw a number of mines downsizing, some either closing during the period. This led to the individuals who were under employment in those sectors gradually moving into the informal sector. And most of these guys who went into the informal sector were people who were educated, were people who were professionals, were people who were helping their businesses in terms of these tax compliance issues. So as these problems went on by, most people now no longer want to go to formal employment. They formed small businesses. And these small businesses, the majority of them were formed in order to take advantage of the government tenders. So they will just register a company, have the first initial tax clearance with the revenue authority, then they will be able to tender those businesses. And the number grew. However, these individuals are not part of the tax net or the tax bracket. Reason being, they've got the past memories, number one, of inflation. And by the corruption index, according to the transparency index, measures Zimbabwe not so good in terms of corruption. So the individuals in business, they feel that it's not worthwhile to register. Why should we register and pay taxes under such circumstances? There is a huge number of regulations and a lot of ambiguity in those. You need a professional to explain to you what you are required to do under a certain tax head. You need a professional to do business. The laws are not friendly to these small to medium enterprises. So as a result, they just say, no. Why should we register? Why should we be compliant of the laws that we do not understand? Tomorrow it will be very difficult for us to comply with these laws. Let's just stay under the dark economy where nobody follows us. Nobody knows our operations. But it is good to note that some of these enterprises are so big. They are so big, their revenues are over 100,000 annually, United States dollars. They are so big by Zimbabwean standards. There is a huge capital in terms of tax that is available in the formal sector. The other reason that I just want to highlight, moderator, in Zimbabwe we have got pricing disparities that I've also spoken about, inflation between 2000 and 2009. Between 2009 and 2017, we were dollarized. We are using the United States dollar, or it's a multi-currency system. The prices stabilized under that system. But soon after 2017, we de-dollarized. The implication was inflation started creeping up. Unemployment started going up. It was no longer possible to have a better salary compared to the US dollar and the local currency. So people went back to the informal sector. In the informal sector, the pricing system is such that if you pay using the United States dollar, you pay the lowest price. If you pay using the cash basis, if you use hard cash to pay for anything, in the informal sector, you pay at a lesser price. Whereas they will be running away from the regulated financial transactions. If you pay through the bank, if you go through a certain transaction through a mobile payment platform, the prices will be higher to compensate for the risk of compliance. That maybe I'll be caught. The revenue authority will look into my accounts. So the pricing disparities made that people in the formal sector would pay more because their payments are done in the formal system. So this growth is going and still going up. Now, these are the challenges that the revenue authority or the state has in terms of regulating the operations of these informal sector traders. They have got a cocktail of measures that they put in place, some of which are not so effective in so much as to tap the informal sector. We have got a cocktail of taxes that have been put in place by the state. We have what they call the presumptive taxes, where they just presume it's an absolute figure. The presumptive taxes, they cater for small and the micro enterprises, particularly those in the hair salons, the commuter omnibuses, those small shops who pay a pittance. It's a small amount. These presumptive taxes also apply on importations to say when in a registered company, it's a company that is registered according to the company laws, but it's not registered with the revenue authority. When they import their commercial cargo for resale, when they import goods commercially, they are charged a 10% presumptive tax, which is not much. It's an indirect tax. Then we also have the withholding taxes. Obviously, if a company that is registered, of course, but is not registered with the revenue authority or does not have a valid tax clearance at the moment, they are charged what they are called withholding taxes. So if you do not produce a tax clearance on payment, the buyer or the purchaser will withhold 10% of the amount, the total invoice amount. But this tax is not enough to tame the informal sector. We have got, for farmers, Zimbabwe is an agro-based economy. However, the agricultural sector is not taxed at all. The taxes in agriculture at the moment, which contributed 15% before 2000, now is contributing 2% to the revenue authority. There are a number of taxes to do with tobacco levy, which is charged at 0.75% per dollar. It's quite a pittance. Then we have what we call the miners. Zimbabwe is also endowed with natural resources. So there is a group or a clique of people who do mining, small-scale miners, very small. They produce gold, which they sell obviously to the government. And on payment, they are charged 2%, which is a royalty type of tax. And this 2% obviously is not a direct tax. These are just the minor taxes that do not account for the direct taxes these small to medium enterprises face. We would be happy if a cocktail of taxes that are put in place to deal with their profits. But for as long as these taxes do not address their incomes, it will be very tricky to raise any meaningful receipts from the informal sector. On the part of the government, what they've done was not much. One of the issues that we have been clamoring for was for them to simplify the tax code. The tax code is not friendly to the informal sector, is not friendly to these small operators. This tax code, there should be a separate tax code that would address the interests of these small enterprises, which at the moment is so ambiguous. The government tried in 2015 to come up with an informal sector type of policy. Since in Zimbabwe we have got a fully fledged ministry that is devoted to the small to medium enterprises. So in 2015, moves were made to try and introduce a small to medium enterprise stock exchange, which, however, just went by the roadside. In Zimbabwe, we have what we call a small to medium enterprise bank and a women bank. These are the backbone of any informal sector in any society. In order to access loans from such enterprises, one has to be formally registered. One should be registered with the tax authority. But however, the uptake has not been encouraging as people continue to shun formalizing, rather preferring to continue to operate under the shadow where nobody will follow them for their taxes. In Zimbabwe, one other measure that was introduced in 2018 by the Minister of Finance was the Intermediate Mobile Money Tax, the IMMT. Upon realizing that the majority of tax of payments was being done mobile, the government introduced that 2% tax on all mobile payments to try and to say we don't know who is trading using the mobile platforms, but we understand that the majority of these payments are to do with the informal sector. Let's put them on board. And it has caused a huge outcry. And I knew we quickly picked it up that those individuals who are not used to paying tax are the ones making the loudest noise. And the 2% tax has gone a long way. It has been a game changer in terms of taxing the incomes of informal traders. However, this has taken them away from the formal sector, from the formal payment systems, where they've now moved back to the cash-based system of their payments. I think in brief, that's the Zimbabwean context.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prince. We hope we have Clifford on the line. Is Clifford on the line now?
Yes, I'm online. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes. Welcome, Clifford. We were not hearing you earlier, but welcome. We would like for you to quickly jump into this conversation. It is getting really interesting. Zimbabwe has this huge problem of 60% of informality to national GDP. Egypt has indicated 55% of it to GDP. Can you tell us the story of Kenya in terms of the definition of informality? What has the government, or what is the government doing to address the issue of informality? What are those basic legislation that are in place to deal with the issue of informality? So I was saying, can you share the story of informality from the Kenya perspective? How do you define informality, and what are those things that the government has put in place to deal with the issue of informality?
All right. So from a Kenyan perspective, the informal sector basically refers to persons who are not who have not been officially brought under the tax net. So largely, when we talk of the informal sector, we talk of people who do not have who have not registered for the requisite tax obligations, and likely most of them do not have an identification number for purposes of tax assessment. So largely when we talk of the informal sector, those are the guys we are referring to, and there are basically around 5 subsectors that we largely refer to as the informal sector from a Kenyan standpoint. And the biggest among the sector are the artisans, what in Kenya we call the Juakali sector. Probably, I know you may have heard that term from a Kenyan tax maybe a Kenyan tax practitioner at one point or another. So when we talk of the Juakali or the artisans, we are talking about the craftsmen, we are talking about the carpenters, we are talking about the mechanics, we are talking about all those people who would say likely depend on doing stuff by doing the real actual stuff using their hands. So that likely forms the informal sector. The Juakali bit of it. Then secondly, when we talk about the informal sector, we also under that group we also have farmers. A lot of the farmers who do basically farming for subsistence largely, and also for very very small scale retail, like for sale in the markets in the evening and stuff like that. And also together with the farmers, we also have this category of people like fishermen. They likely fall under the same category. Then the next category of the informal sector are likely retailers. Retailers, these are people who basically buy and sell either imported goods or locally manufactured merchandise, and they do it on a very very low scale or small scale perspective. Then the next category we have the organized groups, what in Kenya we call chama, which is basically a Kiswahili word. So under the organized groups, we have the community-based organizations, we have youth groups, and we have women groups. who come together for the purposes of basically undertaking a few economic activities to alleviate their economic status. And eventually we have the group of people who are still referred to as the informal persons from a tax standpoint, landlords. And most of these landlords are residential landlords who probably own a few structures here and there, and probably it's something small built on either a parcel that has been bought or a parcel that is ancestral. So largely when we are talking about the informal sector, then we are talking about all these people. And what we have seen with the people under these categories is that most of them are not registered for tax purposes, and they consist of a big population, and even in terms of the GDP, their contribution could be in the region of about 57%, which is quite significant, because from a Kenyan perspective, we are largely an agricultural economy, and most of all these people are very, very informal. They're not registered, and this is where we have seen the Revenue Authority try to put in a lot of measures of late to try and bring in these people into the tax net. So maybe Darlington, if you allow me, I would quickly move on to highlight some of the tax measures that have been put in place, basically to try and nab in the informal sector. First of all, the government of Kenya has been trying to implement a turnover tax regime, whereby it basically works like the simple sales tax or the VAT. They just do a percentage, which was largely at about 3% of the turnover. Then they pay to the government the following month. Then for farmers, we had a regime that was introduced for farmers, and this one was specifically for the sugarcane farmers. We had a presumptive income tax that was introduced to basically nab in these guys. Then this kind of things have not been very, very successful, and what we have seen is the government has tried to change tax. So right now, with the advent of mobile banking in Kenya, it is really a big thing in Kenya now. What the Revenue Authority and this has been driven by one of the largest companies in Kenya called Safaricom, which usually has a product which allows people to pay for goods and services using the mobile money. So you just deposit money in the mobile wallet, and you move it, wherever you go. You'll find most people who have registered till numbers. So you basically pay through the till. What we have seen KRA, the Revenue Authority here in Kenya, do is to make it mandatory for someone to actually produce a copy of their personal identification number, the PIN number for KRA, before you register for these mobile money platforms. A till number or something like that. So that basically allows the KRA to have an overview of and even request information about some of those payments. Another thing we have seen the KRA try to introduce currently is the idea of the minimum tax, which obviously we're really trying to put our minds around it, how it's exactly going to work. But the minimum tax regime has been introduced at 1%, and eventually one thing that now is going to nab in a lot of most of the informal guys, especially in the tech industry, is the digital service tax, the DST regime. So the DST regime, which was introduced through this year's financial budget, is meant to take effect from the 1st of January 2020. 2021, and basically this is going to work like a withholding tax mechanism. So we have a lot of the small people who come up with the tech platforms to either sell goods or buy goods or just be an intermediary. So basically there are regulations that have been proposed around how to on how the DST program is going to be managed, whereby either the owners of the platform or the vendors who trade on the platform are going to be required to account for taxes. So largely that covers our informal sector and some of the tax measures that the revenue has been trying to put in place. Over to you, Darlington.
Thank you, Clifford. Before they are taxed, they need to be registered, like you said, with a personal identification number.
Yes.
Here in Liberia, we call it tax identification number.
Yes.
We want to go back to Mustafa. Mustafa, tell us the scenario in Egypt. What are some of the things that your government or your tax administration has put in place to ensure that informal actors are registered? What are some of the incentives that are in place or that the government is intending to put in place to have taxpayers in the informal sector registered? Quickly, I also want to add something that Prince talked about from Zimbabwe, the issue of corruption, the issue of corruption serving as an impediment for people moving from the informal sector to the informal sector, or for impeding people paying the taxes. What's the scenario in Egypt? Can you take us through, please?
Yeah, sure. As I've mentioned that the Egyptian government now working on the new law, and according to the new law, the projects of informal economy that have the ability and willing to apply for reconcile their status, they can simply apply for it and have a lot of incentives like tax exemption and other incentive rather than the tax incentive. So when it comes to the tax incentives, you find that the project shall be exempted from tax and fees and stamp tax and documentation fees and for a period of 5 years. And when it comes to the non-tax incentives, you find that it's, the company provide cash flow incentive and refunding back the allocated fees for the project, and granting the project for total or partial exemption for the interest payments, for example, or the delay payments. And the state bears a portion of the cost of technical training for workers as well. All of these incentives give the opportunity to the non-registered SMEs or the informal economy to apply for the new law and to be under umbrella of the economy. Also, in order to encourage the investors of SMEs project, the legislator had provided legal protection for this project. No suspension decision may be issued by legal authority to suspend any licensed project or close it except in the event of committing a violation, for sure. And finally, the law worked to reduce the bureaucracy that might harm the investor interest and which could destroy the incentive and advantage offered by the legislator in this law to attract investors to the Egyptian investment climate through pushing every public employee who shall delay or suspend the project license or harm the investor interest without any legal justification, for sure, with a fine of not less than 100,000 Egyptian pounds. So all of these incentives, including tax incentives and non-tax incentives, attract the non-official, non-formal SMEs work under the climate of the government. That's it. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Please go on.
I'm just saying that the government offers a lot of incentives, including tax incentives and non-tax incentives, to encourage the investors or the SMEs to work under the climate of the government and the umbrella of the government. So they provide them a lot of tax exemptions, and they provide cash funds and a lot of and refunding back, like establishment fees for the companies. All of these incentives given by the government under the new law definitely help and attract the non-formal economy to work under the umbrella of the government.
Thank you, Mustafa. Let's shift a bit to current topic of issue of COVID-19, and let's bring back Prince into the conversation. Many governments around the world have given stimulus packages to actors in a formal economy, in a formal sector, whether it's SME or whether it's government workers, but developed countries have given stimulus packages. What's the scenario like in your country? In Liberia into the picture, a stimulus package was given, and then we indicated to them that you need to have a tax identification number before you benefit from government stimulus package. What's the scenario like in Zimbabwe? Did your government offer any stimulus package to the actors in the informal sector? If yes, can you take us through how was it like? How was it designed, and what were the effects?
Thank you. Basically, the Zimbabwe government, in light of the COVID-19 disruption, introduced an 18 billion Zimbabwe dollar stimulus package that was meant to cushion formally registered businesses. The amount was not directed to the informal sector. Those guys who were not registered are not eligible to benefit from this stimulus package. For you to benefit from this package, you must be registered. You must provide documentation of what you do, the number of employees, the insurance, national insurance numbers, and so forth. So the stimulus package in Zimbabwe was not directed to the informal sector. Rather, it was mainly for the formally registered businesses.
Clifford, was that the same scenario in Kenya? If not, can you share with us what was it like?
So from a Kenyan standpoint, what we saw was that a raft of measures were announced by the government, and I would say a few of them actually were beneficial to the informal sector. For a start, what the government did was to reduce the VAT rate from 16% to 14%. So at least that had a trickle down in effect on everyone. But as far as the informal sector is concerned, my view is that is where all the incentives stopped. The other incentives were obviously directed towards employees who obviously have pay as you earn being deducted from their salaries. The top band rate was reduced from 30 to 25%, and there was also an increase in the reliefs, and obviously also a raise in the minimum taxable amount. A lot of money was channeled towards payment of pending VAT refunds. Obviously, that basically is going to have an impact on persons who are registered for VAT. And the entire government budget towards this was about 175 billion, which could be about let's say about $175 million, something like that. And out of this, we can clearly see that the informal sector directly benefited only from the reduced VAT rate, such that probably the amount at which they buy the items basically went down, and that was it for the informal sector.
Stay with you, Clifford. Thank you. What do you think could be some of the measures that government or your government could take in improving the taxation of the informal sector? I know the challenges are huge, but what do you think could be some of the measures that the government could put in place in Kenya?
Well, so some of the measures.
That's a great economy. Yeah, come on and go on.
Some of the measures that the government would put in place, in my view, are requirements. For example, before accessing most of the basic services, let's say banking services or registering for utility services, then one has to obviously bring in proof that they're registered for taxation. And that is something which the government has tried to sort of implement, but we haven't seen it take like let's say we haven't seen a lot of traction in that, and even benefits from that perspective. And also maybe just scale up sensitization of taxpayers so that people know that it is actually a civic duty to pay tax. So sensitization, in my view, would be the biggest thing, followed by obviously now trying to now legislate the issue of maybe before you access some of these services, which in most cases most people cannot do without, you have to produce your PIN, and obviously just try and reduce on wastage. The biggest reason why we have a very what I would call tough-headed informal sector is because every day the news is awash with corruption stories. This has been lost. In fact, right now there's a big joke in Kenya that there was an expose around the way some of the budgeted money for COVID PPEs has been squandered, and all of a sudden the testing went down, and we moved from about 600 cases per day to about 100 or less than 100. And there was a big joke around about an expose being the COVID vaccine for Kenya. So so what we are seeing is that when the government can just basically crack down on these corrupt practices, reduce wastage, sensitize taxpayers, and just make it a requirement that people must have their PINs and make correct declarations, and maybe follow it up with an element of compliance checks, then maybe the informal sector can serve their basic purpose of also contributing to the tax revenues of the country.
Thank you, Clever. I mean, the issue of corruption cannot be overemphasized where the tax certainty is concerned. Prince, can you jump into the conversation? Do you think could be some of the measures put in place by your government to bring people from informality to formality? What could be some of the suggestions, some of the measures?
Certainly, you reckon that when it comes to tax compliance, especially on these informal sector traders, tax compliance on its own is a function of what you have been discussing, tax morality. What is it? What is the view of the taxpayers towards their government of that day? What is their view of the government on the government's governance issues? The issue that comes to mind is the government able to provide public goods and services? Should we pay taxes? Taxation is an exchange between taxpayers and the government providing certain services. And we have noticed that the view of the taxpayers is that the government will only come maybe November, December here in Zimbabwe, where the Minister of Finance will come up with a little bag with tax measures on how to tax the people, ignoring maybe the other side on how they are going to improve the livelihoods of the taxpayers. Yes, there's quite a range of issues that the government can do to deal with just the perception of the government in the eyes of the taxpayers. Then we also have the issues to do around, as you know, Africa is known for foreign direct investment. So if a foreigner from the West, from Europe, wants to invest in Africa, they are given tax holidays. They are given tax incentives. Some of the mining firms did not pay taxes for up to 20 years. They did not pay income taxes. They've got such incentives. But those incentives are not given to the local indigenous taxpayers. I think that's an area that the government and the revenue authorities should look into, the tax holidays. If you go to China, you form a small company, you are given 5 years to trade, you are registered, comply with the other local authority laws before you even pay your taxes. Give them 5 years to settle down. But if you just register today, the next month, your revenues are up, you meet the value-added tax thresholds, now you have to pay VAT. So that's one of the areas we should also look at, those tax holidays. Then there are tax amnesties. Some of these guys or traders have been in the formal sector for quite some time, making monies. But now they want to formalize. They know that if they come in to formalize, their past will be looked into. So give them tax amnesties. No, we are waiving penalties and interest on what you are supposed to pay if you declare voluntarily. Simplify the tax code. It should be simple, not only for the professionals to understand the tax code. They should know their obligations. What are they supposed to do in simple terms? Then we also have issues to do with digitalization. You have to simplify the registration processes. In our previous discussions elsewhere, we're advocating that the revenue authority should not ask for a lot of documents in order for you to have a tax number. It's not necessary. Just have an application that each and everyone can actually register. I want to get registered for a tax number. It should be simple, not to carry huge volumes of papers just to register to get a BP number.
Thank you.
Yes. Just a conclusion. Finish on this one.
Go on.
Yes. Just put those incentives. Most of the informal traders in Zimbabwe are importers. Just form an association for them that says, no, if anyone is a member of this association, and if you import goods, number one, clearance will be fast. Number two, the taxes that you pay on the customs duties, you are charged at a lower rate than the rest. That should give incentives so people know I should belong to this association. But to belong to that association, I must be a registered tax operator and benefit from these incentives. Government should provide infrastructure where informal traders operate from. In that way, they gain the credibility from the taxpayers. They will see a reason why they should pay the taxes. So those are some of the areas that the government needs to look at before they legislate the high taxes. There should be a tax policy that is centered around the informal sector. In other jurisdictions, they say the informal sector is the engine for growth. In India and the UK, no economic growth comes from outside. Economic growth should start endogenously from inside. The people and the citizens of a nation should drive the economy upwards. So the tax policies should first benefit the locals before we give benefits to outsiders. Back to you, sir.
Prince, thank you. You touched on major topical issues in the tax landscape, the issue of tax incentives, the issue of simplification of the tax law, and those are critical issues right now that are being discussed in the tax landscape. But let's quickly move on to Mustafa. As we try to wind up this very, very important topic. Mustafa, can you just quickly jump into this conversation? What do you think could be some of the measures that the government of Egypt could put in place to ensure that informality is dealt with, that taxpayers or actors in the informal sector move gradually from the informal sector to the formal sector? And I would appreciate when you talk about the issue of corruption, the issue of the provision of basic social services, as some of the as some measures, right? Just touch on some of those issues, particularly provision of social services or the so-called social contract between the government and the taxpayer. And then you can also talk briefly on the issue of corruption versus tax morale or tax certainty in your country. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, as mentioned, the new law that Egypt is implementing right now is working mainly to attract the SMEs to work under the umbrella of the government through giving a lot of tax incentives and non-tax incentives as well. So when it comes to the tax incentive, you find that there are a lot of tax exemption, including exemption for the stamp tax, the registration fees for the next 5 years. And the government also work now to make a huge penalties on the employees who are preventing there are a lot of bureaucracy in our government, and there are a lot of corruption. Employees there, the public employees preventing the SMEs and investors to make their process easy. So the government here put certain limits and certain article in the new law for such employees to have a penalties and interest. It reached to 100,000 Egyptian pounds for those employees who prevent the investor to make his work easy. As well as you find that the company provide a lot of incentives providing cash flow incentives and refunding back to the SMEs, and the state bears a portion of the cost of the company may expense during its work. All of these incentives or measures actually motivate the SMEs and informal sector to work under the umbrella of the economy. So as per the last announcement by the Ministry of Finance, the expectation to have to increase that the tax revenue for the upcoming 5 years will be 2.5%. This increase of tax revenue it's not because the increasing of tax rate or changing in the tax jurisdiction or the tax law and stuff like that. It's because we are targeting now to collect the informal sector. So all of these measures will have a very good impact during the upcoming 5 years.
Okay, Mustafa, thank you. Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time, and there's this major issue about informality over the digital economy, but that's a whole big topic all by itself. So we will not endeavor to discuss it here. But let's hear your parting comments. Let's first begin with Clifford from Kenya. Let's hear your parting comments where the subject matter is concerned, and probably you could briefly just tell us something little about informality or the digital economy. But let's hear your parting comments, Clifford.
Sorry, can I just get the question again?
I was saying that we are running out of time, so we are back to you for your parting comments. But there's this topical issue that has to do with informality over the where the digital economy is concerned. We see a lot of people, especially here in Liberia, they trade using social media. So in your parting comments, let's talk a little about it. I know it's a huge topic all by itself, but just talk a little about it in your parting comments, where the topic under discussion is concerned as we conclude.
All right, thank you, Darlington, thank you, everyone. So, from a Kenyan standpoint, my belief is that we are yet to properly tap into the informal sector. One of the means that will really help the government to tap into the revenues of the informal sector is by just engaging these taxpayers through structured outreach and programs, and also just reduce on wastage, and to an extent try and get into the digital space, especially for the small players who are trading through the digital space. I think it would be a good thing if the governments could just get into the digital space and put in place a proper framework to enable the persons who trade under such frameworks to pay their fair share of taxes.
Thank you, Clifford. Prince, your parting comment, please.
Yeah, certainly. As with regards the digital tax, I think the revenue authorities would find it much easier to tap into the digital space if they introduce the necessary technology that will be able to detect and to see when transactions are happening. Remember, the digital space, things are happening in the real time. So it will be much easier for revenue authorities to tax this. In Zimbabwe, currently we have a law to say that if you do any payments on this digital space like Facebook, you are now expected to pay VAT. So VAT has started being charged by Facebook at 14.5%. We have an e-commerce tax on all payments that go through Visa. So I think they will just step in. The majority of people who use this Visa and who do Facebook advertising are in the informal sector. So I think the advent of the digitalization of the economy will reap good rewards for the tax authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Prince. Mustafa, your parting words, please.
Okay. Finally, I recommend that we need to make a comprehensive legislative reform and facilitate business registration procedures and encourage banks to grant loan for the SMEs project, and that's it.
Go on, please.
Yeah, as I'm recommending that for the Egyptian market, we need to facilitate the business for registering the registering procedure and reforming the tax system as well specifically for the SMEs and making a simplified tax system targeting this sector and encouraging banks to grant loans to these projects as well. So this is my recommendation actually.
Okay, thank you, Prince. Thank you, Clifford, and thank you, Mustafa. This has been a very, very interesting discussion. The challenges posed by the informal sector in all of our countries are very huge. All of the suggestions, all of the mitigations we have all discussed, they are so critical, and we just hope and anticipate that our government, our revenue authorities, will put in place the necessary measures, the necessary tax legislations, especially from our legislators, to ensure that the issue of informality is adequately dealt with. One thing I want to highlight as we close is the issue of the certainty of taxation as we fight corruption and the provision of social services. And like all of you said that I think the African governments and African tax administration should step up. We should all step up our game to ensure that the fight against corruption is lifted to the next level, and that people can have that level of certainty that their taxes are working on their behalf. But informality is a huge challenge. The OECD has put informality in Africa at about 70%. We hope the next time we have this conversation in the future, that percentage will have reduced to, say, 50%. But thank you to Africa at Share for affording us this platform to discuss this very important and critical topic. And gentlemen, let's say thank you for all of your brilliant views, and do have a very good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Darlington. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for watching the discussion. If you like the discussions, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, and follow us on social media on Facebook, Africa iShare platform, on Twitter, Africa iShare. Thank you.